before it actually happens. That Supreme Leader Trudeau, we talked about the nuclear weapon in civil litigation. Well, when you find out that Trudeau's going to use the nuclear weapon of laws, explain that, because I think it's poignant to, it'll be poignant to a lot of people.
Well, yeah. And so you remember, we have this weird thing in Canada that one of our founding fathers is still alive. The guy who signed and negotiated and drafted our Charter of Rights and Freedoms in 40 years ago is still alive. And he's very concerned, obviously, about the condition of our country and the direction and its violation of charter rights. So he had agreed to come to Ottawa to speak. And so he spoke on the Saturday on the main stage. And he stayed over a few days into the next week. And it was on the Monday or the Tuesday of the next week, I believe, that the Emergencies Act was invoked. And I'll just double check that date because I've got, as you can tell, lots of dates in my head. Yeah, it was February 12th, Monday. So that morning, I was actually in a meeting with Tamara Leach, and we were working on a letter to all of the elected officials about what the truckers were looking for. And one of the things that they were asking for, in addition to the mandates to go away, because Peckford had talked about this on the main stage in his speech on the Saturday, is a Royal Commission public inquiry, because we need to understand what happened in COVID and how governments reacted. We need to understand the mistakes that were made and if anything was done right, so that we can learn from it and not make this horrific error ever again, assuming we get through this yet. And also for a reference case, which is a special thing that I can talk about. Anyhow, so we were working on that. We're putting finishing touches on that. We had a meeting scheduled at the top floor of the Lord Elgin Hotel, which had significance for Premier Peckford because that was one of the rooms he'd negotiated the charter in. Army Tom was there ahead of me, as was my wingman lawyer, Eva. I was with Tamara Leach and her husband. We got driven over to the hotel, and as we were driving, we learned that the Prime Minister was about to invoke the Emergencies Act. So I went into that boardroom, did my quick hellos, and I said, I still believe he's a member of the Privy Council, so he has the designation of honorary, the honorable for life. And I believe he deserves respect, so I still call him Mr. Premier, just as I would when I was
throw in chat. I'm just going to fresh up my coffee. I'll be right back, folks.
So I said, Mr. Premier, I've got some very bad news. And he said, what's that? And I said, the Prime Minister's about to invoke the Emergencies Act. And he looked so serious, and he said, dear Lord. And he understood the gravity of that, and his reaction conveyed the gravity of that. This is government writing itself a blank check over your rights and your life. And he understood what the facts were on the ground and that there was nothing there to justify it. So he understood that this was a retaliatory measure by an authoritarian, petulant child prime minister latching out.
Or retaliatory, or what's the word when you're looking towards the future? Where
punitive.
Well, punitive, but even more like setting the groundwork for digital currency, setting the groundwork for expanding FinTrack to set, what Chrystia Freeland came out and said, these temporary measures, well, now they're going to be enforced forever. The ones that they implemented under the Emergencies Act. What's what I'm looking for? Chat, like projective or prospective measures, punitive, retaliatory, but also prospective. Let's lay the groundwork for the new normal for government invasion of private life.
Preparatory.
And what did the Honorable Peckford do? I mean, he says like he
well, we were calculating when, where's the House of Commons right now? Are they going into question period? When's he likely to make his announcement? And we made the decision to get out in front of the Prime Minister if we could and call an impromptu press conference where Premier Peckford would speak and Tamara Leach would speak, and we would explain, they would explain that there is no justification for this. By that point, all the borders were reopened. The only thing going on was Ottawa. We were in the midst of moving trucks, and we were being stopped. We got shut down on the Friday, and the reason we got shut down, because it was actually on the Friday that the first musings of the previous Friday the Emergencies Act came out, was we were told by the police that it came from the federal government, that they shut down any further moves. The Prime Minister didn't want us to de-escalate. That was the worst thing we could do for him, was to de-escalate and have more jumpy castles and more wiener roasts and more hot tubs. He needed confrontation. He needed people being agitated, other Canadians and Ottawa citizens being agitated, and so our de-escalation move was what he couldn't stand. And they shut us down.
Yeah, and it was obvious from the beginning. It became so obvious towards the end. He needed it, wanted it to be a January 6th. They had their, I genuinely believe they were not legitimate protesters with their Yahtzee flag and the Confederate flag on day one to never reappear. They got their images for that. They wanted to make it a January 6th. If not in spirit, they wanted to provoke the same response. They never got that. And after 3 weeks of not getting that, they come in with the police. Were you on site on the Friday and the Saturday when they were abusing, when they were violently assaulting and arresting protesters?
If you search YouTube, we anticipated the raids, because a lot of the volunteers who were in Ottawa up until November or December were police officers and army officers and paramedics and doctors and nurses and chiropractors and dentists and carpenters and truck, and all these people had been put out of work because they were exercising their choice of informed consent and refusing to be vaccinated, which I completely respect. So we were getting tipped off. And in the early days, they could tell we knew exactly what they were about to do when they were about to do it. So then we did a little counterintelligence on them. If you ever saw Chris Barber's TikTok about everybody pulling up and moving to Toronto, and how Toronto police reacted to that, and it was a joke. So they did a few of those on us, where they did, like, Coventry was a test when they raided Coventry and put snipers up on, they had 6 snipers on the roof. Snipers. You can see them in the video. Snipers. Yeah. Like, what the heck? It's Canada. And they stole some fuel, or they took fuel. Anyway, so we knew, we had a sense that the raids were about to start and the arrests were going to begin. So we had a virtual press conference, and Tamara, with some of the other board members, read a statement about what the future should look like and what the government should do, which is repeal the mandates, reinstate stop these planned firings, reinstate people into their jobs, restore our freedoms, do a public inquiry, direct a Supreme Court of Canada reference case on the constitutionality of all these actions, etc. And then we all kind of shook hands and hugged, because we all had a sense we may not be seeing one another for a while. And she gave me a big hug, and Eva, and she instructed us to leave our location and to go to an undisclosed hotel, to tell no one, because she wanted us to be available to coordinate with the team of criminal lawyers in the event that the arrests began. So we moved to a new location, but we had a great vantage point, unfortunately, and we could see the masses of police coming. Some people have asked me if I was scared when I was there, and I wasn't. I'm not trying to sound like a tough guy or anything. Maybe I'm not. I just wasn't. I just knew what we were doing was right, and I knew what the government was doing was so wrong. So Eva and I were, Chris had been arrested, Chris Barber, and
we're live with the Ottawa
Tamara had been
Convoy
arrested.
Attorney right now.
We were about to observe, and we're assisting with the bail hearing for Chris, or we're getting ready for that. and we were in my hotel room, and we overlooked the street and the front of the hotel, and a Bearcat rolls up, and 3 black SWAT SUVs with a string of police cars and a van. And I said to Eva, uh-oh, and they stopped right in front of our hotel. And I said to her, I said, you know that you and I are the only people in this whole hotel with the convoy. And she said, yep. And I said, well, this is going to get interesting. So we watched, and we thought, like, really? They're going to bring that many people to come and arrest the constitutional lawyers?
Wow.
It was a fancy hotel. So the ice room, you had to use a key to get into the ice room. And I'd gone in there the night before to get ice. And then there's this tall ice machine against the wall. And I kind of looked at, you could actually slide behind it. And I thought, well, maybe I should go hide in there. And I thought, no, I'll just, if they pound on the door, I'll just lay on the floor so they don't have a reason to shoot me. But anyway, we watched, and I said to her, the longer those doors stay closed, the better. And about 3 minutes later, the door still hadn't opened. And about 5 minutes later, they pulled around the corner and they went up to another place where some trucks were. So they were just staging. But that was the only time I was had some fear for my personal safety. But so we maintained our operations there. We had previously set up a network of criminal lawyers. We'd set up a 1-800 number. We had a cycle system where first trucker calls from the lockup, he gets lawyer number 1. Lawyer number 2 is now on standby for the next call. So we had that system. We were making sure it was working. One of the things that was remarkable was when I reviewed, when I reviewed all of the emergency orders, and not just me, the team of lawyers. Like, to be clear, I was kind of the guy on the point. I was the guy with my head out of the trench the furthest, but there was a whole team of lawyers behind us, and I just commend them. But
yeah, it would be, I mean, they're tyrannical, but I don't think they're quite yet at the Eastern Bloc level of tyranny where they're going to arrest the lawyers, unless the lawyers do something egregious. But
well, I thought they might, and the only reason is because they kept overstepping all the time, right? Like, remember, they would always overstep. They overstepped on, no one can bring food, fuel, or supplies to the truckers.
It'll be aiding and abetting. I mean,
aiding, abetting, and mischief. It's like,
typical overreach of authority.
Have you guys
really
read the criminal code? Like, you just can't take words and sort of smush them together and create a new crime. Anyhow, well, what happened when the government overplayed that hand? What did everybody show up with when they went downtown? Gas cans.
Jerry cans.
There was
it was beautiful. In real time, they converted them into water containers, lunch boxes, empty ones, and everybody was walking. It was like the I Am Spartacus, except it was with I Am Jerry.
Brilliant. But let me tell you a really funny little vignette. And I was in the middle of dealing with something on the street, and there's, how you were there. Remember how the police would walk around, and what's the right word, flanksing or whatever, when they walk around like in a group of 8 or 10 or 12, but whatever that term is, platoon.
Yeah,
you know what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah.
It's got a poof sound in it. And somebody in the chat will give it to you, or give it to us. But so you'd see these guys walking around, marching, and everybody's like, hi, how's it going? And they're trying to be serious. So they were all gathered on a street corner. There was a mom and dad, and they had 2 little kids. And I would say the kids were about 5 and 6 years old, and they were in their snowsuits. And the mom and dads had medium-sized jerry cans, and the little kids had the little ones like you get at the corner gas station. And the kid was laying on the ground.
Comments, throw in chat,
right?
folks.
And he's in his snowsuit, and there's fresh snow. Well, what does a little kid with a snowsuit and fresh, he starts making like angel things, and he was using his snow can to like do little symbols as he's right at the feet of all of these police. It was, the juxtaposition was so moving, Anyway, because we'd seen them overplay their hands so many times, Emergencies Act, freezing bank accounts, outrageous statements and false allegations about Russians, arson, guns, all these things that were
threats of sexual assault, according to
they had to add that in after, rapes. And, you know, I never once felt uncomfortable, and I'm a guy, but you talk to the
Well,
women.
but even the liberal, and by the way, someone wrote me and said it was a conservative MP. It wasn't. I don't remember her name now. Even the liberal MP was so oblivious to the risks that she was facing. She was asking Mendocino, how could they have let her walk to the office when she was in such grave risk? I mean, it was so dangerous. They didn't even know they were in danger. Parliamentarians walking to the office.
So when the lead criminal defense lawyer, we called once we got the call immediately. So if you look at the video of Chris Barber being arrested, as he's leaning over the police car and his hands behind him, one of those guys was literally on the phone with me. Like, Chris is being arrested right now. So thank you. Bye. Immediately called Diane's office, got her, you know, did the lawyer code talk to get past reception. And she misunderstood the message. And she phones back because she thought I was arrested. And she's thinking, oh, that's interesting, you know, arresting a constitutional lawyer. But it wouldn't have surprised me if they did it, but it would have been another mistake, just like everything else they did. So, yeah, it was remarkable to be there. And the level of violence that the police used was just disgusting. They didn't need to do it. Oh, I know what I was going to say. So the emergency proclamation says right in it, the federal one says, because they kept saying this is an illegal assembly, right? And we know under our charter, we have the right of peaceful assembly, freedom of expression, all these things. It said, and I'm going to look at my screen here. It allowed for, so the invocation of the Emergencies Act allows the cabinet to, measures to regulate or prohibit any public assembly other than lawful advocacy, protest, or dissent that may reasonably be expected to lead to a breach of the peace. So right in it, it said, look, you're still allowed to engage in lawful advocacy, protest, or dissent. Then within the order itself, and sorry for looking at stuff, but we've been going for a bit and my memory's only so good. Here's what you had to do to have put yourself in the position where the police could prevent you from going into downtown Ottawa or arrest you. A person must not, section 2, participate in a public assembly that may reasonably be expected to lead to a breach of the peace by, and ask yourself if anybody in downtown Ottawa was doing this, okay? There's 3 things. The serious disruption of the movement of persons or goods, or the serious interference with trade. You could freely move goods and services and trade throughout downtown Ottawa. I did it. You did it. Your videos show it, Viva. B, interference with the functioning of critical infrastructure, which was defined. There was no interference. And get this third one. Listen to these words. I'm reading them off the page. I can put them right up to the camera. C, the support of the threat or use of acts of serious violence against persons or property. So if you're threatening or engaging in serious violence against persons or property, why'd they put the word serious? So minor violence was okay. Like, what the heck? In any event, so if you were going to go there to threaten or engage in serious violence against persons or property, you weren't allowed to be there. If you were going there and not interfering with international trade, interfering with critical infrastructure, or not going to get involved in violence or threats to people or things, then you're allowed to peacefully assemble, dissent, and engage in lawful advocacy.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm like, everybody's allowed to be here. So we actually issued on the Friday in the afternoon a cease and desist letter to the police chief. It's publicly available. You can search it. Go to the Justice Center's website, putting them on notice that these announcements he's made, they set up 100 checkpoints around the downtown to stop Canadians from coming in to show their support and protect the truckers. There's no legal basis for that. That was completely unlawful breach of charter rights. I'm reading from the emergency order, the federal one. So we put him on notice that these public statements he's made are inaccurate, and any orders he's given to his police to interfere with lawful protests are unlawful and actionable. I also started getting phone calls from the various police liaison, and I put them on notice. I said, if you guys are looking, and I said, you're looking for your Tiananmen Square moment, aren't you? And I said, I really hope you're not. And I said, get some legal advice, because if you're part of this and you can be associated with doing something to someone when they're lawfully complying with this order, guess what? You can get sued. So, but they went ahead anyway. And I wasn't naive enough to think they're going to, oh, sorry. Thank you, Mr. Lawyer.
And I think I remember my brother saying, if I'm not mistaken, that I think it was you saying basically, yeah, you're allowed to be there, but good luck telling a cop after they've erected a fence and beaten up veterans and hauled them off outside of Ottawa and arrested people. Good luck telling them you're allowed to be there and expected to go anywhere when they weren't even letting journalists go in to begin with. Legal question I've been asking, Keith, and I don't expect a legitimate legal answer, but the Emergencies Act was invoked. The directives were implemented before they were ratified, and then they were revoked before they were rejected or ratified by the Senate. They passed the House. They were never ratified or rejected by the Senate because they were rescinded, revoked by Trudeau. What about the legality of what was done then? I mean, if it was never ratified nor rejected, were the directives lawful? And more specifically, the immunity that the government promised to the banks when they froze bank accounts, did that ever materialize? Or can they face lawsuits, and will they be facing lawsuits?
No, yes, and yes. Okay, let's break this down. There's been a lot of confusion about whether or not the emergency order actually came into effect. And the reason is because we knew there was a process. We were watching the process, both in the House of Commons and the Senate. However, a careful read of the Emergencies Act, the successor to the War Measures Act, will show you that remember to ask me about sumo suits, by the way, and I'll tell a funny story.
Hold on, let me take a note.
Yeah. So under the Emergencies Act, it says that as soon as the federal cabinet, and their fancy formal legal name is Governor General in Council, passes the proclamation through regulation, it comes into force immediately. So it came into force on that Monday. However, the act goes on to say that within a certain number of days, I think it was 10 days, it doesn't matter, a certain number of days, the proclamation must be laid before the House of Commons and the Senate and voted on. Okay? So it was enforced as soon as they did it, but it has these other checks and balances to keep it in place. So if they can't overcome those hurdles, it goes away. It also required that it be laid and tabled before each of the provincial legislatures as well, within I think it was 30 days, a time period set out in the Act. So it was in force upon the cabinet bringing it into force, but it has a level of scrutiny and checks and balances it has to go through to stay in force. And in any event, it has to, there's a mandatory inquiry requirement within 60 days, I believe. And that inquiry by MPs and the committee has been struck, is about to start meeting either next week or the following week. So that's the legalities of it. Now, you asked about liability and immunity. So just because they followed those steps doesn't mean that it was lawful for them to bring it in the first instance. So there's certain criteria, factual criteria that have to be present in order for there to be a true emergency, in order for them to be able, for the cabinet to bring in the order in the first place. And the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms has launched a judicial review and a legal challenge, as has a few other groups. I think anyway, there's been a couple of legal advocacy groups that have also launched challenges. The government of Alberta has launched one as well, taking the position that the federal government, the cabinet, never had the conditions precedent, the requirement factually on the ground. The test wasn't met for them to invoke this, and therefore it wasn't valid. The Justice Center is going to proceed with this, even though the order's been revoked, because the courts need to rule on whether or not the government behaved properly. So that's my answer. Hopefully I've answered that, but
yeah, good enough. And do you think the banks are going to face any lawsuits? And did their immunity ever formalize?
Yes, I think it did. So here's what happened with the bank freezes. Have you seen the RCMP or the police document that was the basis for the freezing of the bank accounts?
I don't.
It's about 100 pages. Anyway, I'm happy to share it with you, but it's ridiculous. I've talked about this before. Somebody leaked it to me. And so the government announced, and Freeland announced, that anybody who was supporting this were going to freeze their bank accounts. So what happened was the basis upon which whose bank account are you going to freeze? So the police talk about, well, we did extensive investigations and we used our intelligence agencies and blah, 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 blah. Well, I get this document, and all the people I represent, 9 of them who had their bank accounts frozen, are all within the first few pages. There's
totally independent,
and they got their pictures
government
and their
body.
home addresses.
That's the way it's
and
set up in Canada,
and something about
where
them.
the judicial
and then I
system
go,
and government
it's about
itself,
5 or 6 pages, and then I go to, it's got the source of evidence
from one another.
You ready for this?
And that's the way it's
source
set
of evidence. Hyperlink to CTV News website, who's who in the Freedom Convoy.
Okay, well, did the CTV get the information from the hack of the individual, or was this just a broad?
It was just
CTV?
them doing investigative reporting, seeing who was at a press conference. And they had people in there I'd never met. They had people in there who were heavily involved in their volunteer roles that they didn't add. It was just CTV's best guess as to who the key players were. That was it. This investigator never left his chair. He just clicked on it and cut and paste. So that was enough evidence to have these people bank accounts frozen, to cause them to miss mortgage payments, to cause the spouse to not be able to pay the dentist, the spouse not to be able to get his diabetics medication, and other serious things that they faced, going to the checkout at the grocery store full of groceries and discovering your Visa and your debit card don't work, and the embarrassment of that, but more serious things as well. One of the interesting things that happened when they started freezing the bank accounts, and it was the acting police chief, the one who sent in the goons from Ottawa, who announced a couple times, you may recall, that we're going to keep investigating and we're going to go after the donors. And then Freeland made a similar comment that we're going to go after the donors. Well, I had donated. You had donated. I only say that because you just announced it.
No, don't. But I'm not. I wasn't. I said it before the hack. Apparently, I'm on the hack as well. But
okay. So I got to check the list to see if you're on the list for.
No, I am. I had people reaching out concerned. I was like, guys, I talked about it the day the GoFundMe shut down. It's like, you don't get to say who people can donate to and then reimburse. I was like, I'm gonna go give it on GoFundMe. So no, I had mentioned it even well before the hack, but yeah, someone was concerned.
So here's what happened, and you can look this up. In fact, was it last week? The head for the Canadian Association of Credit Unions testified before one of the House committees. What happened was there was a run on the banks. I sent my wife down to get a whole bunch of cash out because I didn't know if they were going to freeze my bank account, and I wanted to be able to keep caring for my family. And she said there was a lot of people at the bank leaving with a bag. And they apparently had such a run that they lost their reserve limits. So, the banks got a hold of cash reserve. So they had to go to some backup international banking backstop system. This senior representative of the credit unions testified last week that I have the quote here.
Oh,
she said, Martha Durden, as she said, the combined effect and the panic it created, that Canadians could have their accounts frozen, made by small donations to the coalition. It led to people withdrawing large amounts from their credit union, sometimes in the hundreds of thousands, and on a few occasions, millions of dollars. So, and then people started opening bank accounts at other banks as like kind of spreading out your pots, right? To make it harder, decentralized banking. Someone just, I pulled my money out too.
Yeah.
I just heard.
And Keith, you're confirming it. I received a bunch of calls, a bunch of emails. People from Western provinces said that they were actually told they were limited to several $100s and they couldn't get any more.
Run out of cash.
Yeah, I couldn't. I'm not confirming it. Keith, you seem to be quoting someone who confirmed that the run on the banks was a very real thing. I had heard rumorings that Trudeau and government were getting calls from the banks saying, "What the hell did you just do? We can't deal with this and fix it." I don't know if that's true. I don't know if you know if that's true.
Yeah, no. So if there's a website that tracks like cash volumes, and I wish I had kept the link when I found it, or someone sent it to me. I might even saw it in a tweet. I think I saw it in a tweet. Anyway, it was real. You could see this massive spike, and now we have testimony last week to a House committee from this president and CEO of the Canadian Credit Unions Association confirming that's exactly what happened. So the rumors are true, and the anecdotal stories are proving to be true. So I think what happened was, so why did the Emergencies Act order get lifted? You might recall there was some tension as to whether or not Trudeau was going to get enough votes in the Senate.
Yep. Yeah.
And I have it from a very high source that what happened was a couple of things. First of all, the banks sort of realized when they saw how their customers reacted and how they saw, like, the banks all right now, as we all know, are all about reducing costs, right? Automating, don't go to branches. Well, all of a sudden, if you have a lineup of people trying to open up new accounts that they're only going to marginally use, that's not, that's increasing your operating costs and not giving you a lot of profit. When you have people not trusting your institution, that's bad for your business model. So I think the banks quickly realized that maybe they were a little too enthusiastic. So here's how the mechanics work. The mechanics work, as people are confused about this, because judging by the comments and questions I've had. The mechanics were the economic measures order was issued under the Emergencies Act. It placed every bank, credit union, trust company like RBC Dominion Securities company, so where your RSP and your stocks are, and I said insurance companies, to when you're provided with the name of a designated person, remember that investigator who spent 5 minutes and found the who's who on the CTV site, that guy, and if your name's on his work and has a coffee spill and the smudge from the donut on it, sorry, I can't believe they did such shoddy work. And it was such a trivial thing that would trigger you becoming a designated person. The law placed you as a bank, an insurance company, a securities broker, etc., under a positive legal duty to go through all of your customer lists to see if you have a designated person. And if you had a designated person, you shall immediately cease providing any financial services to them. Okay? Which technically meant, and they even talked about it, canceling your insurance policy, right? So on your house, which would put you in default of your mortgage. Well, they couldn't even give you a mortgage. Like, what are they doing here? And there was a legal consequence to the banks if by not complying with it, a penalty, but also an immunity for doing it. So that was the background legal mechanism. You can look up the order, economic measures order under the Emergencies Act is what they used. But I think the banks realized, okay, wait a minute, maybe we were a little too enthusiastic about doing this and too cheerleader for the government, because it certainly pissed off a lot of our customers and created some problems for our business model. But more importantly, what I heard is the big players in the finance investment community said, wait a minute, what just happened to Canada? I thought it had the rule of law. I thought we had checks and balances. And is this now a banana republic? Is this like me investing in Venezuela or Cuba? Kind of seems like it. Okay, I don't like this. And what about all my investments? So apparently there was a phone call from the US up to the PMO, and it was, we are going to publicly distance ourselves and criticize your action. You have 24 hours, And so the Prime Minister, the circumstances have changed and it's now time for Canada, blah, blah, blah.
The circumstances have now changed. We now have the tools that with a week later that we didn't have a week
And that's
ago.
another thing. Like, I keep watching some of these testimonies. Like, one of the MPs said to the police, how many protesters or organizers, whatever that means, who had their bank accounts frozen left downtown because their bank account was frozen? I know the number. 0. Like, it didn't work. It wasn't, nobody was there for the money. This wasn't a money enterprise. This was about people genuinely disturbed to their core about the future of our country, for their families, their communities, their neighbors. They weren't there for money. They weren't there for economic gain. So anyway, that's the story. And we just still don't know, the fact that Deputy Prime Minister Freeland, Finance Minister, said early on, these powers are so good, we're looking at making them permanent. I just like,
but don't worry.
Why not?
It'll be limited in time, and they're going to respect our charter rights while they do it. Justin Trudeau said they would. I had another question. Hold on one second, Keith. Let's see this here. Okay, the freezing immunity, I asked. Oh, so bottom line, you think that the banks would in fact be immune from lawsuit for anyone that they had frozen?
I'm not sure. I mean, what is the effect if it turns out that the judicial review of the proclamation is successful? Does that mean that the protection has fallen down? They might be. Like, on its face, the intention of the law, if it's properly applied, is for them to have immunity. But what's the consequence if it's not properly applied? So I don't want to close the door on that, and I want to be very clear about that. It may well be the case that the banks do have liability. What I was forceful in meaning to be forcefully clear about is the intention is to give them immunity.
Oh, yeah.
But as to whether they successfully got that coat on, I don't know. And what happens if that coat's taken off?
Well, that's it. And now ordinarily things would be such an emergency. They wouldn't wait a week to debate the directives that they invoked under the Emergencies Act. They would do it overnight. They'd do it the next day. They wouldn't suspend it 5 days later on the Friday to put up fences so they can then take a week to do this. And ordinarily the banks would have acted after this would have passed the House and the Senate, and their whatever promises would have been ratified by the government. Some rumors going around. There was a Conservative MP who tweeted that a woman had her bank account frozen over a $50 donation. I was skeptical. I said, as far as I understood, nobody out there had their bank accounts frozen solely by virtue of a donation. Are you aware or familiar with anybody who had their bank accounts frozen solely by virtue of having donated to the convoy?
I have not found a single instance in the cases that I've been involved with, and all the information and behind the scenes information. And as you can tell, I got quite a bit of it that would say that that is true. I have not seen an instance where someone's bank account was frozen for the sole reason that they donated. So if some guy in a retirement home in Lethbridge, Alberta, made a $50 donation because this was important to him, I think he's going to be just fine.
Yeah, and as far as I understood, the only bank accounts they froze, 206 of them, were organizers or people who had parked their cars on Wellington. I noticed as the trucks were leaving on the Saturday when the cops came in, there was an officer very obviously taking pictures of the license plates as they were leaving. I suspect that's how they went about doing it. The Conservative minister, I mean, I appreciate people get, people don't always get their facts right. In that video, by the way, everyone watching, Viva Clips, 5 minutes of Justin Trudeau getting roasted before the members of European Parliament. One of them referenced that anecdote. I think there's some facts missing from it. I don't think the woman, all that she did was donate $50. If her bank account was frozen, could have been frozen for another reason, and people immediately start associating.
Well, let's be clear about something else, though. They said they were going to do that, the government, and they could have.
Yeah.
Like the fact that they didn't is not a tremendous relief.
Well, my understanding is that even if they said they would, only for donations made as of the invocation of the Emergencies Act. My theory at the time was, even if they said they could, you can't retroactively criminalize something which wasn't criminal at the time.
Let me tell you something else that's serious but funny. The level of incompetence with some of the police and the government officials was just knew no bounds. The other pages in that document that caused people to be a designated person was because of where the truck was parked. It was parked on Wellington. And it says that. Because if you, and I researched this right to the ground and went to the acts and the regulations, there's the parliamentary precinct, okay? It's a defined area. It's bounded by the Rideau Canal, the Ottawa River, Kent Street, and Wellington Street. The police thought that when you say bounded by Wellington Street, that it's inclusive of Wellington Street. It's not. And even in my discussions with the mayor's chief of staff, he said to me in a different context, when it was the mayor's idea to move them up onto Wellington, that the parliamentary precinct police said, well, they can't because that's our jurisdiction. And he's just like, these guys still, like, how long has Ottawa been our capital? Like forever? And these guys still haven't even figured out that Wellington Street is actually municipal jurisdiction. And it's clear when you read the law it is. So the RCMP thought that a truck parked on Wellington was different at law than a truck parked on Bank Street. And it's not. So like it was just like the Three Stooges comedy of errors time with these guys. Like the Emergency Act didn't have the proper basis to invoke it. The provision in the order said everybody could still come down and engage in lawful, peaceful dissent by its own terms. The people they designated either because they found them on a website from a reporter, or they thought they were parked on a street that was in the precinct and it wasn't. Unreal. Can I comment? I really got to get this one point out about the MOU.
Go for it, please. And I had mentioned that for the memorandum of understanding as to what the demands were from that particular.
Well, there was all these different groups that showed up. So we've got a lot of groups across Canada, Take Back Our Freedoms, Freedom Something Else, Canada Unity. They all existed, some of them for months, some of them for more than a year. And once they saw the momentum that the convoy had and the Freedom Convoy, they saw this wave and they were trying to ride it. And they were also trying to make it be successful too. I don't think there was like evil motives here. So they all come to Ottawa and they're all kind of trying to take control of this thing. And one of the groups was Canada Unity, and they came out with this thing called the Mou Memorandum of Understanding. And I just glanced at it. It was something that if you got enough signatures and enough phone calls to the Governor General, then she could hop around on one foot and ride on a unicorn and throw fairy dust. And then a committee could be formed and the government would be disbanded and this committee of citizens would run the government. And I said, you guys, look, there's the only way we change governments in Canada is through a general election. And the only way we have a general election is when the Prime Minister contacts the Governor General and drops the writ, asks to dissolve Parliament, or there's by parliamentary convention, there's a non-confidence vote, and that triggers an election. That's the only two ways. So the Freedom Convoy had always said, we don't support the MOU. We're not calling for the overthrow of the government. We're not even calling for an election.
I interviewed Ben Dichter. I mean, during one of the days in the hotel, I forget what day it was. He specifically said, there's no overthrow. We would, a vote. If there's no confidence, hold a new election. Nobody's here for violence. And nobody's there to overthrow. Nobody's there to insurrect. It was clear as anyone.
So it was the classic example of trying to take some crazy idea of one group, well-intended, I guess, and then paint the rest of them with it, right? So just so everybody's clear, at no time was the trucker movement in Ottawa asking for the overthrow of the government, supporting the MOU, or anything like it. They were there because they wanted the COVID restrictions lifted. They wanted the rule of law followed. They wanted civil liberties respected and the Constitution and our charter respected. Full stop.
I can't. I was trying to type an answer. By the way, when I said that Jagmeet's brother said he didn't, it was obviously to highlight what an idiotic excuse it was. Jagmeet's brother donated $17,000 to the convoy, and then when the MSM found out about it, he asked for a refund because he didn't know what the convoy was about. My sweet tushy, and just look, I'm not going to bring up another.
I do that all the time, don't you? Drop $17,000 on things that you don't know what they're about.
Oh, but like, but I'm my question also, what even happened that caused Jagmeet's brother to not understand how bad this convoy? Does he didn't want to support bouncy castles and hot tubs and dancing? There's someone in the chat. We all know who she is. I don't want to bring heat on her. I don't know if this person is legitimate. Just going to address a few points. They were not blocking roads, full stop. In fact, anyone watching my streams would have seen, I remarked on it all the time. There was always a lane to go through, with the exception of Wellington from, I forget what the streets are, but and they blocked off the street to allow for any traffic as needed. In fact, so much so, one day when I was walking, a fire truck blasted through an intersection easily at 70, 80 kilometers an hour, so fast that everyone was like, holy cows, that's really dangerous, because anybody crossing the street would have gotten nailed. So they were not blocking the streets. And by the time the Emergencies Act was invoked, the blockade in Windsor, which in fact was never really a blockade to begin with, that had already been lifted as well by court order. Second thing, it's illegal to donate to a terrorist organization. Yeah, when you're designated as a terrorist organization, like the Proud Boys, whether you like the designation or not, they've been formally designated, so you can't donate. The trucker convoy, rhetoric and whatever you want all day long, was never a terrorist organization. On the contrary, it was a federally incorporated, not-for-profit that got all of the paperwork done by the government. So yes, it's illegal to donate to a terrorist organization. No, the convoy was not one, never designated one, and you can't just make it one because you don't like it. Any more than donating to BLM can be, so there's that other talking, there's other points. I don't know if you're a bona fide individual making these comments or this is just a troll, but for the clarity for the rest of the people out there who might not have seen. And not a terrorist organization, so it was never illegal, period. And call it what you want. You're entitled to be
back in the
not
70s,
use language properly or the
Measures
law.
Act,
and they were not blocking the roads.
FLQ,
they made it their business to make sure there was a lane open so traffic could go
Pierre
through.
Laporte,
there was some traffic in certain areas.
Patricia Hearst,
but every emergency vehicle could get
chain
through as needed and did get through as needed.
Part of this thing.
Rant over.
And then later, back in the early 2000s,
go for please.
When we had the G20 in Toronto, they had changed that War Measures Act
Army Tom, as we
to
called him,
the Public Works Act.
And the reason why we had to make up
the Emergencies Act that was used recently by Trudeau with respect to this Ottawa trucker convoy
parachuting into this war zone.
This is what this conversation is all about here, folks.
And so there was three
questions,
Toms,
comments,
and
just
so
throw in chat,
I started coming up with these nicknames. There was one guy whose nickname's Red October. Anyway, it was because I asked, I didn't realize this, but as I would be moving around and in a war room, I'd be shaking, what's your name? And he's like, Sean. And then do something else, turn, what's your, I guess I asked him his name in like 4 minutes, 5 times. So finally he looked at me, he goes, Red October. And I went, what? And he said, now you'll remember. And I did. So anyway, and we had nicknames and so on. But I would see Tom, and he had this like classic Army captain, right? Big map of downtown, marked up, huge map, covered like this whole section of the boardroom table. And so you'll see it in the background sometimes in some of the videos they did or versions of it, and highlighted and little stickers and everything. He would check every day to see who had come in through the night and who had left. Remember, this was organic. We didn't know. There'd be a convoy from Kitchener would arrive with 20 trucks. It was like, what? Where are they? So Tom would, and where would they go? They would sometimes go into the emergency lane. So he was constantly making sure, talking to the block captain, you make sure that thing's clear. And then he would get up and you see, I got to go. He'd grab his coat and he was out the door and down around 3 blocks and move your truck. He was committed to ensuring that those emergency lanes were all the time. And he had a very, very personal reason for it with his own family that I won't get into. But that's absolutely, I remember I came out on the street at one point, was moving from one hotel to another because we ended up setting up also war rooms at the Sheridan as well. And same thing, this fire truck comes barreling through, and I looked at the truckers. I said, next time that happens, you videotape that.
I captured it. I remember.
I know you did. I saw it. I actually thought it was fast forwarded. But your hair didn't flutter.
So I was flabbergasted. There could have been dogs, whatever.
Yes.
Let me bring this one up. Space Cowboy. I'm not reading this to agree or disagree with it. I just want a detail that I forgot to mention. Just want to tell Canada that the Proud Boys are not. However, okay. There's a reason. Sorry, there's a dog here floating around. It just distracted me. There's a reason also why the government wants to designate entities terrorist organizations, because it makes it easy to freeze bank accounts, seize assets of designated terrorist organizations. So agree or disagree with the designation for Proud Boys. I had never heard of them until the government issued that declaration, but that's the strategic reason. Funny thing now is, now the government's realized it doesn't even have to designate an entity a terrorist organization to freeze their bank accounts and seize their assets. They can find other ways of doing it. Mere accusations or Emergencies Act invocations. So it's like
media reports.
People have to appreciate that. Like there is a strategic reason for which you would like to designate an entity a terrorist organization. Generally, it's necessity and actual danger for law enforcement. It facilitates law enforcement, but it facilitates seizures and freezing of bank accounts much more so than not.
Just to emphasize, there was a lot of streets downtown blocked, like a lot, by the police. Do you remember seeing that? Like the big concrete barriers they had, and then they'd have police cars. That's where the blockages were. So they created this. I was always struck. We cycled in lawyers in and out on the team. And the first thing I said is, you guys got to get down here and see this. And they were just like, wow, this is not what I saw on the news. Not what I saw in the news. I'm going to tell you the funny thing about the sumo suits.
I was just about to remind you. So, I don't know, Keith. You seem to have a good bladder. Mine is about ready to explode. But
okay,
we're neering on 3 hours. By the way,
I know. This is fantastic. Can we do two more things and then?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Please.
We'll go. One is okay. So in the morning meeting, there'd be a morning meeting at 8 o'clock in the operations center, and all the different truck captains would be there. The guy responsible for the porta potties would be there. These are all logistics people. It was just amazing, their skill levels. The Danny Bulford, head of security, would be there, former RCMP. And we sensed that this big goon show was going to show up, and it was going to get like it. We were fearing it was going to, what happened was going to happen. So they brainstormed, right? So I don't know. I've never seen those inflatable sumo suits you can get for like some, and then two guys kind of go. And then have you seen those inflatable translucent bubble type things you can get in? So they actually were about to order 250 of those. And we were going to put happy faces on them and balloons and kids' dinosaur symbols and hearts and Canada stickers. And when the police goons lined up in their riot gear and all their stuff, we were going to put all the guys in the sumo suits and the bouncy things, right? Could you imagine the image of the police trying to stab to pop the air? So I just love these guys because they were so creative all the time, like the gas cans, the bouncy castles, the playing hockey, the all the different things they did to try and demonstrate their resolve to fight for freedom. The last thing I really got to say is the Justice Center does not operate on oxygen. They operate on dollars. And I volunteer in my time. I'm still getting paid an hourly rate, but at a very, very significantly reduced hourly rate. I'm happy to do that. And even better yet, I have the full authority of my higher authority. I remind her that she volunteered me for this, and she points out, no, I voluntold you. And I said, yes, dear. However, we have criminal defenses. We are dealing with trying to get the money to the truckers. We've got the charter challenge. We've got the challenging the Emergencies Act order. We're defending, the Justice Center's defending doctors and nurses, lung transplant patients. If if people are getting their refunds from Give, Send, Go and would like to help the truckers and would help the fight for freedom, please consider donating. Tom Marazzo had talked about working on something. We now have an arrangement where the Justice Center will be looking after Tom's legal needs as well through me and funding it. So if you can, please consider donating to the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. They're a registered charity. It's a safe donation. You will not get your bank account frozen. If you do, the lawyers will be close.
Wait until the government
gets close.
Hold on a second. I was going to look for something. I was going to say, who knows what the government designates the lawyers who represent people that they've designated as whatever. Everyone is the enemy.
Yes. So you get, the nice thing about donating, unlike your Give, Send, Go or your GoFundMe, is you get a tax receipt because it's a registered charity. So you get some relief at tax time. You get tax credit for it. So I would urge you, and when you go to their website, the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, jccf.ca, there's a drop down on donate, and you can decide whether you want to support Peckford's travel mandate charter challenge that I'm lead counsel on, or whether you want to support the Truckers Legal Defense Fund, or whether you want to just throw it generally in, or any one of the other cases. So I hesitate to do this, but there's so much heavy lifting going on. I think you're getting a little bit of a feel for how much work we've been doing and how hectic it's been, and we got a lot of work to do.
Well, yeah, it costs a lot,
if
guys.
You care about freedom
Anybody,
and want to try and take your country back,
make a big difference.
One of the many things you can do, among others,
just
is
for the filings
help
alone,
us
just
by making donations
to
the Justice Center. If you consider that, I'd be very grateful.
And don't even be reluctant to do it. I've pinned the donate link to this stream. I'm going to put it in the pinned comment. And the thing is, look, there's a bunch of fundraisers, and you never know which ones are the good ones, which ones you're going to get screwed on. You can go directly to people that you want to support. There, I put the link for Dr. Crystal Lushku, who I interviewed yesterday. There's the Iconic Cafe, who's got a Give, Send, Go. So you pick and choose,
yes.
And then you do that at your own risks, because you can never do any 1,000% secure due diligence, with the exception of JCCF, certain recognized charities that have been around for a while. You can feel good knowing that the risk is less there. But if you want to go direct,
JCCF has been around for 10 years. I was approached by some other groups to be external counsel to them, and I picked the Justice Center for a reason. I think they're the most credible. Other groups are doing tremendous work. I'm not trying to be negative towards them, but to me, it's the organization that's got the ability to do the heaviest lifting on the most important cases. So that's why I decided to do this work for them and volunteer my time at phenomenally reduced hourly rates. And again, I'm happy to do that. And as I mentioned, my wife approved. So
I can tell everyone in the chat this from my own experiences. JCCF, Rebel News, through their various legal projects, I can't think of many other lawyers or entities in Canada that are challenging these measures. And people say, Viva, go out and do it. Look, we all do what we're good at, and we do what we think we can make a difference doing. I think I would be a liability at this point in front of a judge. And I'm not cutting my hair, so I know what a judge would say. But no, the JCCF truly is doing the legal Lord's work of.
And I would also echo, I've known Ezra Levant and I went to law school together. Can you imagine how much fun that was? It was a lot of fun. We had the Laissez-Faire Club where we were taking on political correctness, and Ezra was a character then, as he is now, and matured into a very important figure in our lives and our society. I would echo what you said about Rebel News as well.
Yeah. They're the two entities categorically doing what needs to be done,
and we cooperate. We work together because the Democracy Fund through Ezra and Rebel, they have a number of Freedom Trucker clients as well, and we work together the way that lawyers properly do when you're on the same side of something. And so we collaborate with them. We're not competitive with them. We all have the same goals, which is stopping injustice, advocating for civil liberties and trying to get this tyrannical government under control.
All right, fantastic. Now, not to, I might have another guest next week on other constitutional. Well, not next week. We may have another good constitutional discussion coming up sooner than later. Keith, you will come back on and give us the updates as things progress. Doesn't have to be a 3 hour. You can pop in for 15, 20 minutes.
Yeah, whenever you'd like, I'd be happy. Thanks for having me on. And your announcement that former Premier Brian Peckford is likely to be sitting in this place on your screen soon.
Excellent. I would be super. I mean,
He's
everyone
an amazing man. The stories he can tell you and the illumination he gives to what was happening behind the scene and how our charter was birthed is absolutely captivating.
Fantastic. So stick around, people. We'll see what happens there. Sunday night live stream with Barnes. Probably go live tomorrow. We'll see what happens. Keith, stick around. We'll say our proper goodbyes. Oh, hold on. I'm sorry. Hold on. Just before we go, there were a couple of Rumble rants. One said, 214 Montreal, fascism is alive in the parliament. Thank you very much. There was
Rumble rants.
I'll skip this one. Viva, can you and Keith acknowledge where I got to that one? And there was one more Rumble rant, which I think I missed.
Oh my.
Son of a beast thing. I missed it. It does. Well, the Rumble rant, thank you. Keith, stick around. We'll say our proper goodbyes. Everyone out there, thank you very much. Cut, clip, share. You know what to do. And don't lose faith. There are people fighting for our rights, even if some of us don't know that our rights need to be fought for and vigorously defended. Keith, thank you for doing what you do. And everyone else, enjoy the rest.
Okay, folks, so that was Keith Wilson. Okay, so Keith's the lawyer for the Trucker Convoy of Ottawa. And so that gives you some insights into what he's going through and what the legal situation and obstacles were with, or are, with dealing with the federal government and their overreach of powers, and actually a lot of it has to do with the interpretation of the Emergency Services Act, which they invoked, and the RCMP inappropriately applied their version of how they thought they could act within the legal framework of that act. One of the things that I mentioned earlier was this. Okay, if you go back in 1970s, Pierre Trudeau, the father of Justin Trudeau, invoked the War Measures Act. That's when Pierre Laporte got kidnapped by the FLQ, held hostage. Patricia Hearst, daughter of the Hearst publishing empire down the States, was involved. She had been kidnapped and became part of the FLQ. So that was the War Measures Act back at that time. And that goes back to the Second World War. And then later, back in about 2001, 2003, we had the G20 in Toronto. And the Prime Minister at that time was a guy by the name of Stephen Harper. And they had changed the War Measures Act to the Public Services Act. And there was, some class action lawsuits as a result of that because of, again, government overreach. And so that Public Services Act became this Emergency Services Act. And so as has been the case, like back in the 70s, War Measures Act, that was an actual different situation altogether. But here with this trucker convoy, this is a peaceful protest. And the easy situation would have been government negotiate with the people. That would have been the most logical and sensible thing to do because it was a loving, peaceful process. But they want to cut corners. They want to be the swinger of heavy bats. And they stripped away constitutional rights. And in two ways: by invoking this Emergency Services Act unnecessarily, and their interpretation of its application was an overreach as well. So this is where we've got this issue, and it's going to ruin people's lives for years. It's just nonsensical. So just remember, folks, love and peace is going to rule. Use your own deference, get the facts, understand what is progressive and loving that helps people versus what is negative and destructive to people. So stand up for nurturing and progressiveness and free will and rights so that we can all benefit and live good and prosperous and abundant lives. Or you can go back to the old way of doing things, dive into the negativity, abuse, overreach of power, and ego, which is destructive. So this trucker convoy here in Canada was a message to the world how something can be done that was extremely peaceful and loving. And make your mark, make your name, and that's what it's all about, folks. So take care, love and peace to the world. Take care, folks. Talk to you all soon. Ciao for now.